Hello, in this video, I'm going to talk about how to write a literature review. So in past videos, we've talked about the importance of a literature review and how to conduct one. But now we're going to talk about how do you actually write that up. So how do you write your literature review for your study proposal or for your final manuscript? So we want to organize the papers or the sources that we find by important concepts, which hopefully you've done when you completed your literature map. So you're organizing the papers or the studies that you want to include based on the concepts or how you might want to present them to the reader to support the importance of the proposed research. Now, as you're writing, it's really important that you're following a style manual as you go. So what I mean by that is like whether you need to use APA formatting or MLA formatting or some other type of formatting, make sure that you are doing that as you write, because it will really be a pain if later you have to go back and change everything and add in-text citations and things if you left them out. So much easier to just do it as you go. So which style you use will depend on what institution you go to if you're a student. So different institutions have certain styles that they like to stay with. Or if you're getting ready to submit your manuscript for a journal, then look at what formatting they require for that journal. So the easiest way is if you can write it from the beginning in the formatting, in the style that is required by whoever you are writing this for. So make sure, no matter what the style is, that you, as you go, are including in-text citations, okay? So you're putting your references in text. So in our picture here on the top where it says in-text citations, that is an example where you, in this case, it's a quotation. But even if it's not a quotation, if it's just a point, it's information, but paraphrased in your own words, you still need to include the in-text citation saying, here is the source where I got this information. And so you're writing a literature review. So the whole point is that you're sharing points and information about and from all of these different sources that you've found. So as you're writing, you need to put the in-text citation to say, here is the source of this information, here is the specific study that I'm referring to. And so you do that in APA formatting, you would do that by putting the last name of the author and then the year of publication. And if it's a quotation, then you include either the page or the paragraph, depending on whether it's a written source or an electronic source. If it's not a quotation, then you don't need any page or paragraph number. Okay, so if it's not a quotation and you paraphrased it, then you simply are saying, here's the author and year of publication of where I got this information. And then at the very end of your paper, so at the end, after all of your writing, you should have a list of references that would contain all of the information for every source that you cited. So all of the papers that you are drawing from and including the information need to all be listed in the reference list. So every single source you use, there should be in-text citations and it should be listed in your reference list. So if there's a paper that's cited in text, you should be able to say, oh, Alvaro 2017, and then look down at the reference list and find that entry, and you would be able to find the whole, all of the information. So what was the title of the article? What journal was it published in? And so forth, the DOI. So make sure that you include all of that. So if it's on the reference list, it should be cited in text. If it's cited in text, it needs to be on the reference list. All right, so definition of terms. As you are writing your paper, you're going to use all sorts of terminology. It's unavoidable. It's how it works. So standard kind of normal terminology, like it might be anatomical terminology or things like that, that are very standard and consistent. You don't have to define every little thing if the standard definition applies. Because if somebody doesn't know a term, they can simply look it up and have that definition. But where we want to define terms is if, like a lot of times there are terms that are used slightly differently in different contexts. So like in different disciplines, you might use the same term, but have a slightly different meaning. Or even from one researcher to another, you might have a slightly different intent or meaning behind a term that you're using frequently. So it's important for any of those kinds of terms or terms that are very specific to the research that you're doing that you wouldn't expect a knowledgeable reader to necessarily know about. So define terms as you introduce them. So you might introduce a term in the introduction, define it there. You might introduce a new term in the methodology section, define it there. So you define the terms wherever you introduce them. If you are designing a study or writing a proposal or a literature review and you have a lot of terminology to discuss, then it might be worth having an actual definition of terms section. So you might do like your introduction and background and then have definition of terms. Like you might have a totally independent section where you discuss and define your different terms. And you might want to do that if you feel like you need to defend why you chose a certain definition for certain terms. Like maybe it's a term that's been used differently in different contexts. That's an opportunity for you to describe and explain, here's the definition, here's the operating definition that I used here, and here's why I chose that as opposed to this other definition that maybe I could have used. So that could be an opportunity to kind of discuss that and discuss other similar terms that, and maybe why you chose not to define them that way or use this other related term. Okay, so when you're ready to write, you're going to start with some kind of explanation of how you organized what you're about to read. So as a reader, it's helpful to have kind of an idea of where we're going with this so that you're not just meandering through all this information. It's nice to know what you're going to read, and it helps the reader to be able to better understand what they're going to read. So start with something that explains that. Then you can go on to review literature about independent variables. So you can discuss like, what are the variables that you intend to manipulate or that you want to observe, and then go on to discussing the literature about the dependent variables. So what are the variables that you expect to be affected by the independent variables and why? Of course, when we talk about independent and dependent variables, we're really talking about quantitative research, but you can apply the same idea even if you are writing a review or a proposal about qualitative research. So it wouldn't be independent and dependent variables, but you would still explore the literature related to whatever it is that you are studying and how you would review the literature. And if we're talking about qualitative literature review, you'd still be discussing the literature related to whatever the experience is that you're trying to learn about, or the phenomenon, or the population, and so on. Then once you are finished discussing the literature about those specific aspects of your study, then review the literature related to how your independent and dependent variables, or whatever the things are that you are intending to study, how those interact. Okay, so there will be a whole body of literature about the independent variables and a whole body of literature about dependent variables that you think are going to be affected. And then there will be a whole body of literature showing where those two variables or sets of variables intersect. So you're going to want to combine that and write kind of a summary and assimilation of the literature that connects those independent and dependent variables. Okay, and then after that, you are going to summarize, and your summary is going to build into an explanation of how everything you've shared is in support of the study that you're proposing. Okay, so you're going to start by highlighting the most important studies. So you're not summarizing, 50 studies, or you just wrote a whole literature review. So you're not going to summarize everything you just wrote, but give a summary that highlights some of the most important, most relevant studies that really support your points and your why your study that you're proposing is going to be important. Make sure that you discuss major themes. That's especially the case in qualitative research. So you want to summarize the major themes that have been supported by the literature and in the studies that you presented. And then build from there, build from that summary, and discuss why more research is needed on these areas. So you're starting with what has been done. What are the main themes of what has been done, especially if it's qualitative? And then where do we go from here? Why is this not enough? What is missing here? What is the gap in the literature? And then build from there to explain why the study that you're proposing is going to fill that gap in the literature, and why your study is going to build on everything that you discussed here and meet this need for additional research. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you for the next video.